Dank jullie wel. My 5-year-old son's biggest wish is to fly like a bird. And here he's watching this huge flock of birds dancing in the sky. And at some point he asked me, how do they know where to go? And who is the boss? And it struck me that he, in his short life, was already thinking that there must be a leader, telling the others what to do. So a top-down approach may work in some settings, but in our rapidly changing society, with all these issues facing us, I think we need other models too. Or do you think we need one single leader can solve them? So let's talk a bit about these issues. Soon we will be on this planet with 9 billion people. And we simply just cannot afford to keep going with these linear take, make, and waste processes, because they will lead to ecological crisis that will impact us socially and economically. And I'm sure you have heard this all before, but for some reason, many of us choose to ignore that. And maybe it is because you think it won't impact you, or you think you can't do anything about it, or maybe you feel someone else should solve it. Maybe one of our leaders. Well, I don't think the answer will come from our leaders. I'm convinced that we need to move to a circular economy. We need to change the way we produce our food, how we manage our energy and our waste streams, and how we make stuff. So how can we transition to this more healthy system? And what are the answers, if not from our leaders? Well, I think the answers are all around us. And I'd like to tell you something about biomimicry. Biomimics are people that turn to nature for solutions. They study photosynthesis and thermoregulation and self-sustaining ecosystems. And they look at eyes and ears and skin and shell, and they emulate these designs and processes to solve human problems. And when I learned about biomimicry for the first time, I was instantly infected. And I left my job. I started with a couple of others at Biomimicry Netherlands, and I took this amazing 2-year program and became a certified biomimicry professional. And with my peers, we studied thriving ecosystems and well-adapted communities in nature. And we created this online course, and I'd like to share some of our findings with you today. So first, in Costa Rica, I learned how the rainforest creates these continuous loops, how it recycles everything that's needed. And it works so well because everybody plays a role in the system. There is no unemployment. So what we can learn here is not only how to minimize our physical waste, but also how to reduce our human capital waste. We also found that life succeeds in a cooperative framework. These bees and flowers, they co-evolve and they form these win-win relationships. And rather than leaders, we see everywhere distributed and decentralized networks that are interconnected and interdependent. And we found that diversity plays a huge role. Having niches in your community limits competition and it benefits coexistence. And diversity also helps to create these closed loops and to make our systems much more resilient. And what we can learn here is how to bounce back after disturbance. And some species, they even use the disturbance as an opportunity, like the lodgepole pine, because the fire triggers the release of its seeds. So nature teaches us how to become much more flexible and adaptive, instead of wanting to be in control all the time. And finally, we looked at self-organization, which brings me back to my little boy who asked me, who is the boss, when he was looking at birds. So does that mean that there are no leaders in nature? Of course not. We'll just remember Boquito here. And hierarchy is great for maintaining predictability and repeatability. And that is why it works so well for the military and the emergency response. But there's also a downside to it, because it kills autonomy and initiative and creativity. It makes people sit and wait for others to solve their problems. So, what other models are out there? Well, some amazing things are being accomplished in nature through self-organization, like fish that swim in these huge schools, and they seem to move in this coordinated way. Or termites that build these huge nests and regulate their internal temperature, and they're home to millions of them. Or when geese migrate, the leader of the V formation, they rotate, and this is not only because the front goose gets tired of the headwind, the much more important reason is that no one single goose knows the entire route. So all this collective behavior is being performed without an overseeing director. There's no blueprint being followed, and there is not one single individual coordinating the others. And it works so well because of simple rules and feedback loops. And I'm not trying to say that we should be exactly like these organisms. We're humans, we're not fish or termites. We can envision, we can plan ahead and take initiative. But what we can learn from those leader-less organizations is that we all can be a catalyst for change. We too can achieve these major things through many small interactions at the local level. So we don't have to wait for industry or government to take appropriate action. Actually, I think it's a little bit ironic that now governments are starting these civic initiative programs because that's sort of bottom-up, organized top-down. But at the same time, it's a great step in the right directions because roles are shifting also for governments. And even governments, they can benefit from these self-organization lessons, like they've done in Boston, where people can adopt a fire hydrant and keep it clear from snow. And people want to do that because they want to rely on accessible and available hydrants. And this is saving the council a lot of money and time. So imagine what governance will look like if we start putting the word self in front of it. And another great example of biomimicry comes from the UK, where as a civic initiative, people started to collect cardboard waste from restaurants and shops. And they shredded it and sold it as horse bedding. And once the horse bedding needed replacing, it was going onto this compost file, where worms were feeding on it. And when the extra worms were then fed to the sturgeon fish farm, who produced caviar, and then the caviar was sold back to the restaurants where the cardboard waste was collected in the first place. So this is, I think, an incredible example of how all waste can turn into food. Just like in nature, how all waste becomes a nutrient for someone else and ends up in this continuous cycle. And we're even applying biomimicry to our own organization. We're currently setting up this biomimicry knowledge infrastructure, and we asked, how does nature build a network? How does nature connect individual components? And how does nature share resources? And we learned so much from the fungi. Picture this hill, a forest on the hill, and on top of the hill is a small pine tree. It's twisted in the wind, gets lots of sun, but the water drains down quickly. And down at the bottom of the hill, you have this small maple tree. And it sits in the shade, but it has all the water there. And there's also a family of fungi living there. And the fungi, they have created all these relationships with those trees. And in fact, and they do it through their roots. So there's under the ground a whole system going on. And the fungi, they bring the water from the maple up to the pine tree and the sugars from the pine tree down to the maple. So without the fungi's work, both trees would really struggle. But with these fungi, it's becoming this flourishing, resilient, thriving ecosystem. And by mimicking these fungi, we were able to create these critical connections that are now plugging in biomimicry in their own networks. And we are sort of out of control, which is great, because now it's becoming this self-organizing, resilient system. I want you to take away two things from my story. And the first is that all the success that has endured on this planet for 3.8 billion years is the result of many, many small actions of many individual organisms. Think of all the diversity, all of this incredible abundance around us. All of that, and none of it was driven by a top-down leadership approach. Life builds from the bottom up. So each one of us can make a difference. And each one of us counts. And we need each one of us to make the necessary transition. And my last point, my second point, Margaret Wheely said, there is no greater power than a community discovering what it cares about. And when you discover what you care about and you want to do something with that, then remember that you are not alone. We are part of a huge community out there. We are surrounded by all these million successful models that have learned to live gracefully on this planet, and they are here to guide us and help us to do just the same. Thank you.